Hey guys, in today's episode, we're talking preseason and we have a special guest, Mini Monk, here from the coaches panel, does a lot of work with them, and hope you guys enjoy the episode. Hey Mini Monk, how you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad. It's good to have a chat about some preseason stuff. How about yourself?
Yeah, I'm doing really good. Just want to say before we get started, thanks for coming on. Obviously, this was a bit of a spur of the moment type deal, but you're a very knowledgeable person and preseason's among us, so might as well chat some footy.
Yeah, sounds good. It's definitely good to chat footy, and I'm always keen to have a chat with people, especially when we're coming into this period of time where there's a lot to discuss.
Before we get started, just wanted to ask, how many times have you remade your team in Supercoach so far?
I actually haven't played around with my Supercoach team quite as much this preseason. I play all three formats, so I tend to tinker around with one of the three teams every now and then. Mainly been playing with my fantasy team, but I think I maybe only had 3 or 4 drafts of my Supercoach team so far. I'm pretty relaxed with it.
Have you found there's a lot of players who are in all three, or is it kind of specialized? Some for Dream Team who are only Dream Team, some for like fantasy who are only fantasy, and the same for Supercoach?
I think there's a lot of overlap between Dream Team and Supercoach because of the way their pricing systems work, and rookies and mid-prices tend to pick themselves across formats. It's premiums where you get a little bit more of a differential. Like you've got players like Oliver and Laird who, despite how good they are in AFL Fantasy, are on an absolute another level in Supercoach. And then you've just got other premiums as well. Like down back, you had all 5 of, Doherty, Sinclair, Dawson, Stewart, who are all amazing. Whereas in AFL Fantasy, it was really just Doherty was the standout player. And then a tier down was Dawson and Sinclair. And then the next were a tier down again from there. So that's kind of the biggest difference, I guess, between the formats.
Cool. Before we kind of get started on the preseason stuff, how about we just get you to introduce yourself? Let's start with who you are, what you do, and like what football team you go for.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Mini Monk, as you've obviously alluded to. I tend to play all formats of AFL fantasy type, all forms of fantasy football. Mainly started off in AFL Fantasy itself, jumped into Real Dream Team a couple of years ago, and then into Supercoach last year. And I managed to have a pretty good year there, finished 245th overall, and had a very good year in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team as well. And just hoping to replicate those results and share some of my learnings from that year and, continue to improve from there. And I support Fremantle Dockers. I grew up in Perth and around the area and kind of got into it through my parents, in particular my dad, and it's just stuck ever since then. So I'm a bit happy with the fact that they're doing a bit better now as well.
Yeah, no, I can totally understand that. Being a Roos supporter, I understand kind of teams not being great and then now slowly getting better. Obviously, you guys are at a different point in time than what we are, but similar kind of stories there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Were you someone that always used to watch like football games as a kid and that continue on into the adulthood, or something that, hey, you've been around Fremantle at home, didn't really watch a lot, but now with fantasy football, that kind of thing, you've got into it more?
No, I've always watched quite a lot of football. I was quite thankful that my parents were able to take me to a lot of the games when I was younger. So I was quite often making trips to Subiaco over every weekend or every second weekend to watch a game, and would watch, Friday night football. It was on at a reasonable hour living in WA compared to over East. And that kind of stuck through. Basically, I used to watch 4 or 5 games a weekend, most weekends. And as I've gotten into the fantasy football, that's kind of stuck through because I think it's very important to have some idea of what's going on based off of what you can see. Yeah. And I think that's, it's a drain when you're doing it on the weekend. It takes up a lot of time, but it's a good thing to do if you're wanting to be quite good at fantasy. I think that helps.
Yeah, definitely. I've kind of found that as well. Stats only get you so far. And you get kind of a bit more enjoyment out of watching the games. Maybe not like at a stadium, but definitely on TV, that kind of thing. You can point out, hey, that's my player. That's my player. Yes. He's on my team. Even if Freo's getting beaten, for example, you can still be happy that Oliver's getting 200 points that week.
Oh, absolutely. And there's a lot of enjoyment that you can get out of, players performing, even if they're, as you say, beating up on your team. And I think that helps to engage a little bit more with the sport for me. There's, a lot of people get a lot of, I guess, gain out of playing fantasy type sports because then they can watch the game and have enjoyment in that manner. And I think that's good. But I think it's also it's good to probably separate, I guess, how your players are performing and your emotions a little bit as well. Like you can easily get knocked down if your player's having a bad game, and it's going to happen through the season. But I think it's nice to ride those highs and just try not to delve too deep down into those lows when they happen.
Yeah, except if when you're a North supporter and you've got like 11 weeks in a row getting smashed by 100, it's just like whoever's playing, which premium's playing my team this week? Let's go.
Yeah. Yes, it's very much target fixtures, and I don't think North Melbourne's going to be the only team that people are targeting this year for fixtures.
No, I think we're actually going to do a lot better as well. So we'll wait and see what happens. But I think Clarko's kind of got some ideas, and at least from the intra club today, I don't know if you caught it or not, but from the intra club today, the guys look a little bit better.
That's good to see. I didn't catch any of it today, but yeah, I've been reading notes as the intra clubs have been going on, and there's obviously a lot of information that's coming out from them. It's very hard to know what's accurate and what's not, and you have to be very careful. And so I'm looking forward to watching some of the preseason games when I guess the non-official ones start next week, and then the official ones the week after. There'll be a bit of time spent watching those and watching some replays and looking at players and trusting my eyes rather than what other people are saying, I guess.
Yeah, I guess that's a big thing as well, kind of going back to actually watching the games versus just looking at stats, is that you might pick up something. Is there something in particular during a game that you look for versus like what people write up on the weekends, that kind of thing? Things you've noticed that they miss, maybe?
Not in particular. I think most of what's talked about is what needs to be talked about with fantasy. It's more just, it's hard to say if someone's reliable. Like even from some of the reports that I've seen today, they say, one player absolutely killed it and they had a great game. And then other commentators come out and said, well, no, they've had an awful game. And because of that dichotomy in information, it's very important to trust in your own kind of intuition and what you've seen rather than getting it secondhand, because, the more layers it goes down, the worse it kind of can get with the accuracy of the information. But in the normal things that you're looking for inside of preseason games is like role, like what's a player doing during that game? Is it what they've been doing in the past, or are they doing it to a better level than they have? That's like the main reason that you're wanting to be looking at, say, mid prices or even falling premiums. And then with like rookies, it's like, are they playing a role where their role is needed inside the team and they don't have any other players that can do it at the moment? Like, is there a space for them to fit into their team's best 22? That's really what I'm looking for in a lot of preseason games.
I guess as well with these intra clubs, like players getting load managed, that kind of thing. Hey, is even just a premium or someone else who'd normally play that role, are they away this week?
Yeah, exactly that. I mean, you see it like there's teams that have had 3 or 5 players out 3 intra clubs, and people say, oh, this player's getting 60% CBAs. And it's like, yeah, because they're missing 3 of their core midfielders. No wonder he's probably going to be next in line for CBAs. I think that's what people need to be very aware of, and take everything, I guess, with a grain of salt and wait for it to kind of even out when they actually get into the real hit outs that they've got coming up. That's when we'll get a lot of information that's reliable.
I guess it's also the A versus B teams as well. One player might be getting 80% CBAs because they're playing on the weaker side and someone has to play.
Yeah, I mean, a great example of that at the moment is Toby McLean. Like, he's been getting tons of CBAs for the Dogs during intra-clubs, but he's been playing midfield for the seconds team. Does that mean that he doesn't fit into their best 22? Well, I think there's a place I definitely think inside of the Dogs' best 22 for him to play, but I don't think that his role will be getting 60% CBAs.
No, definitely not. I guess, would you say then that it's all well and good to look at the intra-club games now that are being televised, but the preseason games between teams are actually a lot better place to get information from?
Yeah, they definitely are. Like I said, I think that the preseason games give you much more of an indication of what's actually behind, what actually a team is doing. But some of the intra clubs are really useful for seeing role changes. Like for example, with the Lions, they're playing Rayner off of half back instead of off of half forward and pushing into deep forward as he has been. They wouldn't be trialing that in the intra clubs if they weren't planning on pushing through with that into the season. So that's something that's pretty obvious, and that's something that you can start to take as information from the intra clubs. But you've also got to look at the mix of the teams. Like, okay, a player might be getting kickouts, but are all the other players that used to get kickouts playing on the other team against him? So those kind of things are very easy to lose in the track, because a lot of time people put out like comments and say, oh, this player's taking kickings. Oh, this player's got a good half-back role, but the other half-backers and the other people that take kick-ins are on the other team. So it's not really important.
No, that's fair enough. Is there anything else you've noticed so far? Have you been keeping up with the preseason games, or is it a more next week thing you're looking at?
It's more of a next week thing. I've been quite busy the last couple of weeks, and I've been trying to keep up with what Freo's been doing with their preseason, because there's a couple of players in there that interest me. And
it's your team.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
and I've been taking in information from people inside of, Discord chats and Twitter chats, and there's only so much information that you can take in, and I take everything with a bit of a grain of salt as well, but I'm still trying to get information even if I'm not watching those preseason games, because I still think it's important to have, some idea of what's going on in these teams, even if it's not necessarily the most accurate information. But if there's enough smoke, there's fire.
Definitely true. I guess I'll ask the question then. When you're making your team, how much of it is the gut feeling that you have an idea of players versus information you've got from the preseason games, and how early into the preseason will you actually make your team? Because some people who I know will make their team like 2 weeks into March, right? A couple of days before the game, they compile all the information, all that stuff's filtered through. Or are you someone that will follow the whole preseason generally and build and make changes along the way?
I tend to follow the whole preseason. I made my first draft of the team when Supercoach first came out. Back in December. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I haven't played around with it too much, but I tend to tinker with structure as opposed to with players in particular, because I feel like a lot of what you need to decide on coming into those preseason games is right where the rookie's going to be, where the mid price is going to be, and then you fill your premiums from there. Yep. So I have a rough idea of what kind of structure I'm looking for, what kind of players can fit in where. And a lot of the preseason games, just checking, has things that clubs have talked about, like role changes and stuff, have they actually followed through on them, or are they just not real? And do I need to move this player out of my team? And do premiums, have they actually, continued to be at the level that they were last year, or is the reason why they're discounted, is that not showing any issues for this coming season? I think a lot of the preseason games and a lot of the preseason in total isn't about ruling. You kind of start with a field of everyone, and as time goes on, you start moving people out and you're saying, they're not best 22. They haven't got the role we thought they were going to be. They've had an interrupted preseason. And then eventually you should come down to, 35, 40-ish players that you're pretty comfortable with coming into round one. And then it's just about selecting a team from there based on, how team selection comes out when the teams come out on that Thursday.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have a couple of examples, kind of either way, players you brought in, guys you brought out from looking at the preseason games and information?
Yeah, so a couple that I've talked about, on other places as well, as Nick Dacos and Hayden Young. I've tinkered around with those two quite a fair bit, and have had as much as like none of them, one of them, and both of them in my team at times, and also looked at players that are, just a little bit cheap or just a little bit more expensive, players like Ridley and Ed Richards, and seeing how the information has come through with those players over time. So I think that's I'm pretty confident that I want to start someone that's around that price point in my backline. But it's more about finding which one fits in that point, I guess.
Are you in the camp? I'll ask you about Hayden Young first. Is he a lock, do you reckon, or are you going to kind of wait for him?
I don't like to use the term lock very much, because it's very hard for a player to ever be, a lock. I mean, the only ones you can really consider a lock are players that are just stupidly discounted because of injuries, or rookies that have great job security and great pricing. In terms of premiums and mid prices being a lock, it's very rare, because the scoring fluctuation that you're going to get between picking, say, Hayden Young and Nick Dacos isn't likely going to define your season as much as getting onto the right rookies to start your season is.
No, I get that.
That being said, I'm very confident in starting Hayden Young. I think that there's enough upside in him from what I've seen and what I've read. The question will be, is there as much upside in him as there is in someone like Nick Dacos? Which is why there's the tossing up between the two of them, because like I said, I'm confident in starting him, but if I think that he's only going to go up in 10 points of price, whereas Dacos might go up in 15, then you're going to want to start the player that's going up 15 instead.
Yeah, no, that's fair. In 2022, we kind of saw Supercoach change, probably had its most drastic change ever, with the DPP changes, the extra trades, but also the trade boosts. Do you feel like maybe your advantage, or one of the reasons why you finished so high in Supercoach last year was because you came into the game not having played it before. Like, you could just analyze the game for what it was then versus carrying trends from other years in, or kind of just, you know, the things that you did throughout the year did it. Because I noticed a lot of what you'd call mature, established people who played for 5-6 years, they actually struggled quite a lot compared to a lot of people who came in there fresh.
Yeah, I think that does help. I think that the changes made it a bit more similar to how AFL Fantasy worked, and I have a lot more experience over there than I do at Supercoach. Trade management's not a problem over there because you always get 2 trades every week. You just use them or you don't. Whereas here, you've got to be very limited and very restricted in the way that you choose to trade players. And I think that the AFL Fantasy mindset definitely helped me when I started out the year and definitely got me to a very strong position at the buys. But I think it led me to falling a little bit away because I was up in the top 50 just around the buys as well. But I think I got a bit impatient with some of the premiums that I was holding and should have just held them through rather than trading them out at different points. I think the trade boost was something that a lot of people really had, I guess, thoughts about how it should be used, and different players took it a very different approach. There were some players that went really aggressive with trade boosts, like myself. I used all 5 of my trade boosts, you know, before the buys. When there were some players who held one and thought, oh, I might need to save it for later. And I think that might be some of the old Supercoach mentality falling in, because you're thinking, I want to hold trades. Yeah. And the idea of using 3 in a round feels so foreign, except for during the buys, that you kind of get stuck and you're thinking it's a waste for me to use 3 here. Whereas I think if you use them, you could get very quick upgrades going. Like there was teams that were a premium ahead of the rest because they were actually upgrading using those trade boosts from round 3 through to round 6 or 7 and burnt 3 or 4, 15 trades during that period, which set them apart from the rest of teams and led to everyone else catching up.
Yeah, I found that as well. Would it be fair to say one of the things you brought across was the aggressiveness of AFL Fantasy? Obviously, it's a bit different with players' prices changing every week versus after the first 3 weeks, but one of the things like trading sidewaysing premiums, for example, or sidewaysing players who weren't necessarily doing as well was an old mentality for Supercoach, whereas the people that did that last year, like you say, got a big advantage over the people that, held Whitfield, for example, for a few more weeks than they should have.
I mean, Whitfield was the exact example that I was going to use. I started him in Supercoach, and I started him actually across all formats, but in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, he wasn't as big of an issue because his scoring was still high. But immediately at round 3, I needed to restructure. And so I traded Whitfield out and got Cripps in, who I didn't start. Whereas a lot of other coaches were very stubborn, I guess, with him and held him through, even though he was not performing after those first 2 weeks and didn't really have a great role. So I think the ability to flip quickly helps. And again, that comes back to actually watching the games to see that, he didn't really have that great of a role, and his scoring wasn't just that he was having hard games, it was that he was just not performing. And getting onto the mid prices as well made a huge difference. So I think that's the other big change that's happened in Supercoach, is that mid prices are becoming a lot more prevalent. And I have a feeling that people might be overcorrecting this year and really trying to hunt for mid price value and going for too many when they're not there. I mean, last year we had a plethora that worked because there were a lot of premiums who were discounted because of injuries, like Sicily and Cripps to an extent as well. And then you had a lot of players that had changed clubs and were moving into a new role and were able to have a pure midfield role. Like, we're talking about McLean being a cheap mid-pricer. He's not going to be getting the same CBA percentage in midfield share that someone like Brody got last year.
No, that's true.
I think we have to temper our expectations a lot more with what the mid prices are going to be and what they're actually going to be able to, perform at. But I still think that the mindset to actually look for mid-priced options is something that's coming into Supercoach a lot more and a lot faster than I thought it would. And I think it's something that's necessary.
Is that something that's come from fantasy, or is that just kind of the way that Supercoach has changed? It's leaning more towards that now?
I think it's a bit of both. Fantasy started moving towards hunting value in mid prices a few years ago. And really, a lot of that is actually stemmed from the fact that in fantasy, you don't have to start the top of the line across your field. Like you don't start the guns and rookies anymore. You're looking for players that might end up top 8 or top 6 in their line that come in with the value for you to be able to do that. You don't see people going out and picking or starting Rory Laird this year because his price is too high for what he's going to output. Whereas in Supercoach, there's a lot more of a conversation about people wanting to start, you know, players like Ladd and Oliver because they're a lot more consistent. But in a fantasy mindset, you wouldn't want to start either of them. And I think that searching for value is coming into the play a bit more in Supercoach and in Dream Team as well. And it's just how the game evolves over time. New strategies work, people try them out, people like them, and then they stick with the game for a bit longer. In 5 years time, we might be reverting back to, you know, premiums and rookies, but we'll see. We'll see how the game evolves.
Yeah, I definitely feel like maybe the increase of the magic number as well, players being, I guess, underpriced versus overpriced at the top level. And people kind of realizing as well that these top premiums will drop in price. So maybe you don't have to start them, but you have to be ready at certain points throughout the season to be able to upgrade to get them in.
Yeah, it's about finding when the premiums come in at the right price. Like the great example last year was actually Clayton Oliver himself. He had a poor game very early on in the season. His price came down to a very achievable point, and that's the point where I jumped onto him across all formats, and it paid dividends. You're trying to look for the premiums that you would want to start that have a bad game early, and then finding out when the right time to jump onto them is. I think that's a hugely important part of modern fantasy.
Yeah. Is it fair to say, well, I guess Zach Merritt was the same for me. I picked him up at 500. Petrarca was around that mark as well throughout the year. So is it fair to say this year, from what you've seen in the preseason and your assumptions, that we won't get as many mid-prices turning into premiums you're keeping for the whole year? We're really kind of just looking for that value, that 150K kind of mark to use to actually upgrade to somebody?
Yeah, I think so as well. And it's always tricky to say and to predict what's going to happen, but we don't have as many standout obvious mid prices. And I think at this time last year, we had 4 or 5 that everyone was pretty confident on, like Cripps, Sicily, Hewitt, Brody,
Canelio,
even Canelio, Cherry.
You know,
there was 6 players, and they were defining a lot of the structures that people had coming into the season. Whereas this year, the only one that's really getting a lot of traction at the moment, well, the only real obvious ones, I guess, are McLean, Hopper, Yo, and maybe Sheed. There's obviously a lot of talk about players like Warpool, like Bowes, Caulfield, but I don't think that they're quite as obvious. And so it's very tricky to be relying on those players to make 150K. So that's why I'm a bit more hesitant about going mid-price heavy. Like some structures that I've played around with this preseason have only had, 3 mid-prices in them, and really trying to actually go for quality premiums. I think that there's enough good rookies that we'll have. Like, it's not like last year where we were having a lot of rookie headaches, especially down back. People were struggling with, like, you really just had Gibkiss, Paddy McCartan, Sam de Koning, and people were just like, where are we going to get defender rookies from? Whereas this year it looks like we might get 4, 5, which allows you to not have to go for the mid prices and allows you to just go for more of a guns and rookie type approach if you need to.
What do you mean by quality premiums?
When you're looking for a premium, you want premiums that are at least going to perform at their price point, if not outperform them. And you want players that you can hold through the season, and also that will hold their value through the season. So you want players that have a relatively low standard deviation, like a relatively low floor, I guess, in their scoring. If they pop a 60 and then everyone else can get back onto them, then that's not a really great premium to start. But if they can have a floor of, say, 90 and have the ability to pop, say, a 160, 170 through the season, that's a player that you might want to start. So the great example for that is someone like Clayton Oliver, because he doesn't really have bad games even when he's tagged, and he does have the ability to pop 180, 200 scores. Whereas a bad example might be someone like Mills, who has the ability to do those 200 type scores, but he also has the ability to drop a 50 and come down quite significantly in price.
Yeah, Petrarca would probably be another good example of that as well. Guy that can go massive, but also has some real stinkers, especially when he gets pushed forward.
Those are the type of players you want to upgrade into, I typically find, because their price comes down and you can build team value, not necessarily by getting more rookies and mid prices that work, but by jumping onto premiums when their price is at their lowest for the season and then riding them from that point onwards.
Yeah. So you've spoken about maybe starting 3 or 4 kind of what you consider to be real mid prices, not like your token McQueen price players. Do you mind kind of sharing maybe 3 or 4 guys across each line that you're looking at through the preseason?
3 or 4 across each line. If I'm looking down back, the main one
200K plus.
The main one that people are looking at down back is Yo. And I think that if he gets through the preseason with no niggles, no injuries whatsoever, I think it's a pretty clear pick.
Yep.
People like Caulfield and Clark are ones to monitor. McKenna as well, but I think he's below 200. So he's he's playing, I think he's a pretty easy pick.
Expensive rookie kind of position for me.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Just an expensive rookie type of position. If I just have a look at kind of what's being ownership wise, who else is there? Bose is an interesting one. I think a lot of people are kind of looking into him and thinking about him, thinking he's best 22. This is one of the ones that I want to monitor in the preseason to figure out what's his role, where he's going to be playing, because I mean, they're the reigning premiers. They're going to have a good team. So
yeah,
it's definitely, it's tricky to see where he fits in. And there's a lot of players that are putting their hands up for them.
If he does it all.
Yeah, exactly. And the other one that's getting a bit more traction recently is Will Day. And he's, especially after the reports from yesterday where he was getting a lot of CBAs for what looked like the Hawks first team, he's definitely one that I want to be monitoring, because I initially thought when they were saying he was going to get midfield time, they were saying he was going to be on the wing. Yeah. But the fact that he's actually been going to CBAs has me a lot more interested, because if you're on the wing, stealing scores are not there. Chances are he might only average 70. But if he's getting CBAs, there is the potential for him to be able to push 85, 90, and maybe even more, and be able to make that 150K that you need from a player in that type of position.
What's he priced at the moment?
362.
You wouldn't really over Yo though. Like if you had to,
no.
One.
No, you'd be picking Yo over him. Yo's at a cheaper price, and Yo's done it before as well. It's more if your structure wants to really search for value. Like if you're wanting to run maybe just 1 or 2 premiums down back and a couple of mid prices, he's one that you could consider in that price bracket.
Anyone in the midfield you're kind of looking for? I know there's always the Hopper talk.
I think
anyone kind of outside of him.
She's the other one that obviously has quite a few people interested. I think he's more of an obvious pick in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team than he is in Supercoach. But that's more because of Hopper being there as opposed to Sheed himself being a bad pick. Warpool is a lot of talk.
Most people only picking. You mean like most people only picking one mid pricer? They pick Hopper over Sheed just because he's the standout of like the 3 or 4 that's available.
Yeah, exactly. You don't, and in Supercoach especially, you don't tend to want to run more than about 1 mid pricer in your midfield. In AFL Fantasy, you kind of have a bit more of a scaling price point down in midfield until you get to the rookies, where in Supercoach you tend to want to run 4 genuine premiums, 1 mid pricer, and then 3 rookies. It's the structure that I've seen going around a lot this preseason, and because of that, Hopper seems to be the one that most people are leaning to, and I think Sheed's the secondary if people wanted to go for a bit of a point of difference against that. And then at the cheaper price point is someone like Callahan for the Giants, who's getting a lot of talk and playing a lot of midfield time, but I'm still wanting to see what their CBA mix is at the Giants.
Sam Flanders as well?
Yeah, well, I think he's more of a forward option, and it's tricky because a lot of people are wanting to run quite deep in the forwards. You need to run 3, maybe even 4 premiums up forward, and people are picking McLean. And you've got quite good bench options. So a lot of the talk has been, do you want to pick a DPP player and start them in your midfield instead of starting in your forward? And I think that there's that option that exists. Like, it's not unreasonable given the forward options that we're likely to have that works out. And Flanders is definitely one that interests me. I mean, he's a proven performer from his junior numbers. And if he's getting the role that the Suns are saying that he's getting, then he's one that could absolutely break out, make you that 150K very quickly. And be a successful mid-pricer.
Okay. I guess I'll kind of lead into the forward line a little bit now. Is how many forward premiums are you considering? And you're just talking about rookies. Who do you think is going to be available outside of your Ben Kings, that kind of thing, who you consider to be the more expensive? Have you kind of got any knowledge or anything on those people who are a bit cheaper in that position? So
with regards to the number of premiums I'm looking to start, I've really find it hard to justify starting more than 3 premiums up forward. There are structures that I've toyed with that have 4, but it feels like you're just robbing the rest of your lines and you're just waiting for something to fall down if you do that. it might work out if there's enough premiums that come up in the midfield and down back, or maybe a mid-price ruck puts their hand up and makes it a very obvious selection. But I think I'm going to be sticking to around about the 3. And then in terms of rookies, I mean, it's you never really knowing until you actually get to see the preseason games and see how teams structure up, and then you don't know for sure until you actually see the team sheets come out in round 1. But the typical ones that people are talking about are players like Philippou and Pedlar. You got King. Yeah, I think that you're pretty safe if you're looking to start maybe 1 rookie on field up forward. I wouldn't want to be starting 2 because there's a bit of concerns and there's a bit of lack of scoring that might come from some of those players. But if it comes out that we have a couple of forward rookies that have reasonable job security, reasonable scoring potential, then 2 seems reasonable.
Would you kind of stick away from the key forward ones like a Green or a Condon and go for the more maybe rookies who are available who also play mid or have more of a mobile type role in that position?
Yeah, the key forwards are trickier. I think if they're coming in at a low enough price, say like someone like Van Ruin, because he's coming in near basement price, if he's getting games, he can just sit on your bench up forward and generate the 150 cash. Because all it takes for a player like that to generate that cash is just 1 big score. Like we saw with someone like Rochelle last year, who had a monster game in round 2, generated cash, and you could just flip him at round 5 after he's made 150k. So if you're going to be picking players like that, you really just want to be having maybe 1 of them. Because if you get stuck with 2 of them and then you lose one of your rookies that was on field and you're having to field one of them, then you're just kind of in a bit of a precarious situation because you don't want to move them on because they have made the cash, but you also really don't want to field them because they might drop at 20 and that would be disastrous.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's what I've kind of said before about your Rochelle's, but also Wards and McDonald's and those kind of players. They're okay to have on the bench on a pinch, but last year we saw a lot of the people who had them on field copped like an 18, and that was terrible compared to a lot of other people really set them back that way.
Yes.
Yeah,
no, they can really hurt you when, rookies pop bad scores. As much as you can get the rookie rule out right, getting the rookie rule out wrong with players that don't have the role that you need them to pop good scores is like, you're just asking for it. It can be mitigated a bit by ownership. Like someone like Rochelle was so highly owned and so highly fielded. It doesn't matter as much. But if you're playing someone like Ben King on field in round 1 and he drops to 20, chances are there's not going to be a lot of people that are doing that.
No, definitely. Is it fair to say then that maybe it's a better idea to have less rookies on field if you can have it, or have like your Toby McLeans and McKenna's versus like generic rookies?
You tend to want to have players like McLean and McKenna because they've been in the system. They're more likely to be best 22. They're more likely to be match fit and play out an extended period of games. But to say to have less rookies on field is tricky because the cash has to come from somewhere. You've only got a certain salary. There's a certain number of points that you can, I guess, get on your field based off of the magic number. So if you're trying to minimize the number of rookies on field, like if you just wanted to run no rookies, you could, but you're going to end up running a lot of mid prices and you're going to run into troubles that way. So it's about finding a balance for the rookies that you think have good job security, good scoring, good roles. Typically, my preseason teams have been looking around about the 7 marker. I tend to look at 2 rookies down back, 3 in the midfield, 1 or 2 up forward. 6 or 7 seems about reasonable. Any more than that, like starting to get towards 8 or 9, you're probably asking for trouble,
pushing it a bit.
Yeah.
Are you running? So we'll just talk about down back, I guess. We've spoken about the forward line and people stacking the forward line and going cheap in other places. Down back, are you someone, it sounds like, who has a few of these 600k players in their team at the moment? Like maybe a couple of 600s and then a 500 and then like your Elliot Yeo, or are you kind of going lighter in that position?
I've been looking more about 1 in the 600k marker, so one of those top 5 guys, and then a couple in the 500ks, and then running Yo at around about a D4 position and a couple of rookies down back, like Jinbi and McKenna. Pretty safe because they've got a lot of coin in their head. If they're not there round 1, you just downgrade them to someone who is playing. I don't see a huge amount of value in a lot of the defender premiums, which makes it really hard for that 600k to, I guess, even 550, 530k bracket. It's very hard to pick who's going to actually perform enough at that price point. And I think that's where a lot of the appeal for players, like I talked about before, Young and Dacos, comes in, because they actually come in at such a low price where if they even perform 5 points higher, they might be close enough to the top end that it doesn't matter.
And then like your premium has a stinker game, Sinclair or Sicily or someone has a stinker, you can just upgrade like a day cost to someone like them as well.
Yeah, so exactly. I think
that
having players like that is good, but don't get too attached to fallen premiums, because if they have a patch of, running 110 and then suddenly drop a bad game, they might have just been running those 110s because they had, easy matchups, had a better role, and the roles changed back. If there's a fallen premium that has done it before and has gone at 120 for basically an entire season, and they come down to a price where it's gettable, you just get them.
Yeah. I think it hit me last year as well. I think I had Bailey Dale and he did really well in the first kind of half, and I had brought him in and it was fantastic. And then second half, obviously the historic scoring wasn't there. His role got changed a little bit, and then started putting out some stinkers versus some of these other 600k players.
Yeah, I mean, the top 5 in Supercoach, it's going to be very tricky as to which one of them maintains it, because there's question marks over all of them. It's like with Stewart, he's got a relatively harder run, doesn't play down at GMHBA. Is he going to get rested through the season? Sinclair, you got the new coach. Doherty, where is he actually going to play? Is he going to be on halfback, or is he going to be playing midfield? Probably has the least number of question marks out of any player, but he also probably has the least value of any of those 600k values. Oh, 600k players.
Expensive.
Yeah, and then Sicily, Hawks probably aren't going to be great. It's going to be a lot of ball down there, but does he have to play a little bit more accountable as a result of it? And Dawson, is he going to be playing off that halfback, or is he going to be pushing further up the ground? And are they pushing other players down back in order to cover for him? I think that it's very hard to make a case for any of them convincingly, and I think that's why people are searching for values or wanting to start less of those top end premiums down back. And I completely get it. I'm in exactly the same boat. But I also think that not looking to start one of them is you're probably ruining your structure, and you're not giving yourself the ability to pivot onto them if you have to.
Okay. So we've spoken about Dacos and Young. Is there anyone else at that kind of 500k mark that you're looking at during this preseason? Or you've got pencils
down back?
To have a look at? Yeah, down back.
Not really. I've mainly been looking at those two. And then I guess Gus Brayshaw a little bit, but he's more at the 550 as opposed to the 500k marker. I'm interested in his role because in the second half of the season, when he was getting CBAs, his scoring was clearly better than earlier on in the season. But it's tricky to know what that Melbourne midfield mix is going to look like. And so he's been floating in and out of teams. In terms of at that 500k marker, I'm really confident in those two players, in Dacos and Young, being able to outperform their price point. And so I haven't really gone looking too much elsewhere.
Yeah, you've not had to, similar to kind of the Hopper situation. Once the two players are locked in, those two Yo plus a 600k, and then you've got a couple of rookies on there to finish it out.
Yeah, it really just it's how your structure starts to come together. You're looking at the price points that fill your team, and then you find the players that fit those price points, and then you can rotate a little bit from there. But it leaves me pretty comfortable having that sort of a structure in place.
Okay. I guess before we're finishing up, so we're just going to talk about kind of new established players coming into the team, that kind of thing, across each line. What's some specific roles or specific things you want to see in the preseason games to say, yep, this player's in my side? So maybe we'll start in the back line. Like, what's some things as a backline player, maybe a rookie who hasn't come into a team before, or someone returning from injury, what's some roles and things that people at home can look at and watch the games and say, hey, this guy's a lock for me?
So the big ones that people are looking for in defenders is, are they playing in the midfield and getting midfield minutes as a defender, or are they the distributor off that half-back flank? And you're really looking for those two sorts of things for players that have a lot of value inbuilt into them. So if we go back to the Young and Dacos example, there's a lot of talk that Dacos is going to be pushing into the midfield this year and getting CBAs. And there's a lot of talk that Young is going to be getting kick-ins for free and getting a more prominent distribution role. So it makes those two players have a narrative and I guess a story you can tell as to why they're going to increase in scoring. For rookies, you're looking for where are the holes in their particular team's best 22? Where do they have weaknesses? What are the attributes that they have as a player that they can bring and fill that role? And are they the one lining up there for the first centre bounce, I guess, of that preseason game? Because typically teams are going to run their best 22 or their best 18 for that first centre bounce. And say, for example, if Chester is lining up on halfback for the Eagles at that first bounce during their preseason game, chances are he's probably going to be there in round 1 as well. So it gives you a pretty confidence. It's like, it's the same for midfielders when you're wanting to see, are they a CBA midfielder or are they not? If they're at that first CBA in the preseason game, chances are they're probably going to be at the first CBA come round 1 as well.
Yeah. Better lock in Will Phillips then, because he was there almost every stoppage, every CBA today.
I think Phillips is one of the easiest picks of the year.
Yeah. I guess in the forward line as well, kind of, we've spoken about goals, that kind of thing, but also there's some other things that you kind of have to look at with forwards.
Yeah, forwards is tricky. I think it's almost all the lines. You want players that are going to be playing midfield time for the most part. But there are some forwards that can perform really well off of limited CBAs. Like a great example is someone like Dylan Moore, who didn't get really a huge amount of CBAs through the year and was able to score at a high rate even when he wasn't getting them. So you're kind of looking for, do they have the opportunity to be at the center bounces at times? And do they have the opportunity to be able to push into contests and get tackles, marks, kicks when they're in there? Because players like Rosie and Butters didn't have high CBAs a portion of the year, but they're still able to perform at a high level because they're able to push into the ball. They didn't get stuck in a forward pocket. Like I guess another example would be someone like Durden, who was a great rookie. He made a lot of cash, but his role was dreadful because he was stuck in forward pocket half the time. He got to push up the ground every now and then, but not often. So it's about looking for players that have, I guess, ball-winning opportunities rather than being reliant on other players in their team to get the ball to them.
Yeah, I guess like a Paul Curtis as well would be a similar thing. Maybe didn't kick a lot of goals, but either set them up or was pushing up used in that transition kind of thing because he's got quite clean kicks. And good. It's
the difference between players like Oscar Allen and Jacob Van Ruin. If you don't think the Eagles are going to perform that well this year and you think that Melbourne are going to be a very good team still, then you might want to pick Van Ruin because the ball is going to get down to him a lot more than it might get down to Oscar Allen. Yeah,
no, fair enough. Is that fair to say that he's kind of on your books then, someone that you're looking at, Van Ruin?
I think if we are stuck for, bench type rookies up forward at a basement price, then if he's named round 1, he's definitely someone that I'd be considering in my team. But as I say, just on the bench, like you wouldn't want to field him.
Not on the field, no. How's the ruck line look for you at the moment? Are you kind of going the more expensive guys, or kind of you've got some people that you're looking at?
It's been the one that's been doing my head in all preseason. I think it's been doing a lot of coaches' heads in, but it's always tricky because you're so limited in your options. It's not like in the midfield or down back or up forward where if there isn't a player at the price point that you're wanting, it's easy to shave 50K off and make an argument for another player. Whereas in the ruck line, you might shave 50K off and be like, there's still no one here I like. Shave another 50, or there's still no one here I like. It's looking like we're not going to get any reliable, cheaper type options. There's been talk of players like Meek that might get the role, but I'm still not convinced at this point. Again, he's another one that you would want to watch through the preseason to see what his role actually is. And so a lot of the talk from the preseason has been about Marshall, Darcy Cameron, Tim English, and then more in the last month or so, but to a lesser extent, Scott Lysett.
Yeah.
There's been not much talk about the other premium options like Grundy, Rob, Witts, because people tend to think that they're either maxed out in price or that, in the case of Grundy, Gawn coming into Melbourne, or him coming into Melbourne alongside Gawn is going to be problematic for his scoring, which I kind of get. But again, is another great one to watch in the preseason as they're split in roles. So I've been pretty comfortable running Marshall in my ruck line and then just trying to find who I want to pair alongside him most of the time. And I have rolled through all of the ones I talk about, like English, Darcy Cameron, and Scott Lysett have all been sitting next to him in my ruck line through the preseason. And I'm not even confident as to which one it's going to be come round 1 because it's just completely up in the air.
How do you kind of weigh up the risk of playing someone like a Sammy Draper in that position? Kind of someone who you think might be breaking out or not the year, or you'd rather stick up with the safer option and let someone else take that risk? Because if it pays off, you're getting a guy that potentially is 150K cheaper, who everyone's going to jump on, could be scoring 100s at 400K.
Yeah, but that's the same as any mid-pricer, really. it's like if you get a mid-price forward at 400k that starts popping, you're going to want to get onto them as well. The issue with the ruck line isn't that mid-prices can pop and increase in their scoring and increase in their price significantly. It's that if they don't, where are you moving to? Like if you start Draper and he drops back-to-back 50s and you want to trade him at round 3, you either have to find the cash to go up to someone, or you have to find someone that's cheaper than him that's going to have the scoring that you need them to do. And that's why Set and Forget was so popular. It wasn't just that Gawn and Grundy was so good. It's that it meant you didn't have to worry about working your way up in that ruck line. You didn't have to find the cash to get up to them at any point in the season. You didn't have to find the players to step you through it. You could just lock that line away and worry about it in the lines where you have more players you can kind of move through.
Maybe better than to kind of go the more expensive route. And then if you have to change it, then you can without changing a lot of stuff in your team.
Yeah, and I think that's why there's a lot of appeal for, as I said, those big three. Well, the three that are at that higher price that people think have either baked in value or are going to be at the top of their line. And English has shown that he can score at a really high rate. Marshall has shown he can score at a really high rate when Ryder isn't there. And Ryder obviously isn't there anymore. So we just need to basically confirm that he's the number one ruck, which I think he is. And Cameron has shown that he can score at a really high rate when he is the number one ruck, and he comes in at a cheaper price because he had to be essentially a key forward for his first 6 games of last year. But if you think he's going to be rush sharing with Cox, then maybe that's a reason why you stay away from him. So I think that there are risks associated with all of those three, but I think it's outweighed by the fact that they've shown they can score at that 100 to 110 marker for an extended period of time that mitigates that risk, whereas someone like Draper has not really shown that over a 6-week stretch before. And so it's a lot more concerning to start him as a mid-pricer compared to starting someone like Darcy Cameron, who's only, 60k more expensive.
Yeah, no, I get that. I've got 2 questions for you before we head off. What's your big call for this year in Supercoach? It can either be breakout player or someone you think is going to be a top in a position that maybe hasn't been before, that kind of thing.
I'm not sure how big of a call it is, but the one that I've been thinking about is I think Butters will be a better pick than Rosie, even though most people will start Butters.
Yep.
And that's
even with him not playing due to the AC complaint, like now in the preseason game.
Yeah, even with that, I heard wind about that a few days ago, and I'm not too concerned about it because the messaging from the club was that it was bruised, and if it was just a normal training session, he would have played anyway. So to rest players for an intra club like that is not uncommon. I mean, Brayshaw has rest Freo's intra club the other sick. Players miss intra clubs, but if it's only for 1 or 2 sessions, you're not really worried. If it's over the course of like a week that you start to be a bit more concerned about the player's injury history.
I get you. So big call for the AFL. So it can either be Coleman or who you think you have as the premiers or Brownlow medalists, that kind of thing. Actually, let's do 2. Let's go. Who do you think's winning this year? And then give me a big call for a positional player. So Brownlow, Coleman, that kind of thing.
So I think
who's
the Premiership, I'm pretty interested in the Lions winning. I think they've got a very well-balanced team, and they've done very well during the off-season to top up the needs that they needed. I guess a big call might be that, I mean, there's a lot of people that seem to agree with this, that Collingwood will fall down the ladder, but I think that they actually missed the 8.
Okay. That's very interesting.
Yes, it is. I still think they're a great team, but I also think it's going to be very tight in that 4 to 10 bunch. Like there may only be 2 games that separates that part of the ladder this year, which is going to be very similar to last year as well. Smoky for the Brownlow. Don't know. I'm pretty confident in most options. I mean, there's no one that I've got that's miles ahead. Maybe Callum Mills. Smoky for the Brownlow and Callum Mills.
Nice. All right. Well, thanks very much for coming on. We've really appreciated you giving us your time and your insight into Supercoach, definitely during the preseason.
I think.
Where can the fans find you? What have you got going on?
Yeah, sure. So I've been on the Coaches Panel podcast during the preseason, during the 50 most relevant, and I'll be doing some more podcasting with them through the preseason and into the season as well. I'm on Twitter at Minimonk10. So if you ever want to shoot me a message or have a chat about something, just shoot away. And I'm on Discord in a bunch of different places. If you ask around enough, you'll find me.
Nah, fair enough. All right, guys. Well, that's our preseason talk with Minimonk. Remember, like, share, and subscribe if you love the content. We've got our Supercoach group as well, so you guys can win some amazing prizes there. Any final words?
No, just thank you for having me and get to watching some preseason games, not very far away now, and be able to take some information in with our own eyes. I'm very excited for it.
Nice. Remember, guys, here at the Centre Bounce, we do the hard work so you don't have to. Bye for now.